Hello everyone, how you all doing? I'm gonna do another video about the demo scene. This time is gonna be more about poetry in the demo scene, or poems, not necessarily scene poetry, but poetry in general in a serious way, which is kind of weird to say. Anyways, text in demo scene has always existed. One of the earlier crack throws and demos that existed always had scroller text talking about stuff. But poetry itself, like trying to convey an emotion or a feeling or a message, wasn't always prevalent in there. So there are not that many examples early on of poetry in demos. Of course, I'm sure someone will come up with something on Commodore 64 that happened in like 89 or something to go against what I'm saying now. And if you do, that's awesome. Please put it on the comments below. I would love to see it. But I never really noticed poetry in demos that much until later in the 90s. Also, my vision might be a little bit skewed because I only joined the demo scene around 97, so I only know a little bit from there on what was really released on the demo scene. But yeah, the first contact that I had with poetry in demo scene were through the works of Coma and also Orange in a way. Paimen of Coma is the first one that I can think of. Was released at EULA 96 and it had this very intense message behind it, which Vern also always kind of has on his demos, which is one of the things that I really love. But I think the entry that really marked me as how demos or intros could have this very visceral poem message behind it was actually You Am I, You Am the Robot. And it can be a bit debatable if that's really poetry or not. I consider it is. Especially that part where it has like special tunnel effect and a lot of messages flashing to you, and the way it uses dynamic changes to bring this visceral feeling forward. That made a big impact in me, and still to this day one of my favorite 64K intros. Other examples of poetry in demos, The Control by Coma was also a very famous demo and also started using video, I believe. It was one of the first demos to have video, probably not the first, but one of the first ones to abuse it. And Coma did a whole series of demos with videos and this quasi-social political message behind it, that we're in control or we're being controlled and stuff like that. This was mostly Finnish demo scene, but there were, like, for example, a few people in Hungary demo scene also doing some interesting stuff with poetry. Plastik by Chrome is one of the examples that I found, and Angeldust 2 by Astroidea and Chrome is one of the demos that I have bigger reference of. So it's kind of a bit hard to define where is scene poetry and where is actual poetry, because scene poetry was the sort of slang that was used when there's like some demos, some text in the demos to make it, you know, appear to have some sort of message. You call that scene poetry, and it can be anything. It can be people just talking crap or stuff that is semi-related to the effect that is happening, just a filler so you don't have just the effect. And that got a lot of bad connotation through the years, and a lot of people still mock scene poetry. Oh, you're trying to make scene poetry out of your stuff. Anyways, around 97 was when I joined the demo scene, and one of my first entries was called Skyscape. It was released at label at Wired 98, and it included poetry, because before I entered the demo scene I was exploring poetry as a catharsis for myself and for trying to find myself. I was already in depression back then, trying to find meaning in life, and demo scene helped me a lot to find a way to express myself and experiment with stuff, and yeah, so I was already trying to mix poetry and demos together, and Skyscape is a good example of that. Not sure if I can find a video or not of this, but I'll try to add it on this list. Around the same time, My Birdcage by Jamm also had very interesting poetry, comparing human existence with birds and being locked up, like we are controlled inside a society. And a few years later, one of the entries that really made a big impact with me was Backslide 7 by Hellcore and Omnicolor. And all again was very similar to UM the robot. Had this like a barrage of text that you could feel in the music. There was this very tight connection with the music in a similar way that there was in UM the robot. And I'm pretty sure that guys from Hellcore and Omnicolor will agree with me that their entry is very much inspired by stuff from Orange at the time. There are probably a lot of demos that I'm forgetting that had poetry in them and they were good, but these are the ones that I really remembered when I started thinking of the topic of poetry inside demos, or good poetry inside demos. Then there was a scoop called Replay that also did a lot of demos that had poetry, some more explicit, some more abstract, let's call it that. Fall Equals Winter had a poem itself being read out, although it was stolen from the internet and just Radix found a girl to say it, but still it was a poem and they tried to make a demo somehow around it. They didn't really succeed as much as other people did. One of the people that really works well with poetry, or worked well with poetry and a nice eye for demo making overall, was Melvin, of course, of Haujobb, and a few other groups. I collaborated a lot with him through the years, and this demo in particular, unet sydämen ajatuksia, it's using a specific poem and then translating it to different languages and making all the scenes of the intro. It was a 64K, fit that kind of poem, and it really worked very well, and I think it was a very good entry. Till this day, still very well, it aged very well. Other entries from a Replay, some bookprint, and a Broken Heart, but they really did a lot of releases. Replay was very prolific in the late 90s and the beginning of 2000, and most of their entries feature some sort of poem or introspective message of some sort, and this very clean, flat shaded style that they also kind of brought into the demo scene. Around the same time, I was still experimenting with poetry and demos. I went more experimental. I was starting to make music as well, so I did this track that was just dark ambient sort of noise thing, and ambient even can be called, although it didn't really have beats, so I don't know how to call it. I made this demo called Graerk. I wrote this poem called Graerk. It was very visceral and raw, and I tried to get a coder to do it. I found Rawhead of Factory to do it, and we did it for Mecha Symposium 2002, and of course no one liked it, and it ended up 32nd place of a lot of demos. This was like one of the biggest demo compos ever, had like 50 entries or something like that. But it was an interesting experiment, and I really enjoyed experimenting with that stuff. And at that point I was still learning to code OpenGL stuff and Direct3D stuff myself, so I learned a lot from this project as well. At the same demo party, there was this demo called In Control by Farbrausch, which had a proper musician called KB doing actual music and actual lyrics, still a poem in some sort. They had experimented with lyrics in demos before, with Black 2000 I think it was called, but In Control was more on point. But it sort of feels like a music video kind of soundtrack, not really poetry, not spoken word kind of poetry, not poetry interweaved with the demo, more like it just happened that the music had lyrics. Anyways, I wanted to include a few old school platforms as well, so I'm going to include the demo from Losing Victoria by HOOY-PROGRAM, made by Gasman. Had this little poem, which was really cool for the ZX Spectrum. Some poetry on C64 that I remember quite well is Hello Friend by Fairlight. It was a very interesting demo at the time. It really made me think, and like what you can do with demo platforms, that is just using the medium, not really exploring it technologically, but telling an interesting story out of it. So really good work by Hollowman and Go280 there as well. And of course I Am the Seed by CyberPunks Unity and Inward. My friends from Russia, Elf and Miguel, did a really good demo, and most of Inward's stuff features some sort of poetry or mood into it. I remember The Path and other stuff, so they focus a lot on also using words as weapons of mass destruction. Anyways, in PC, Vern was still doing some interesting stuff despite being inactive for a very long time. He released Ballad of a Cluster Bomb, picked up music video which had this very interesting lyrics, and he made something very poetic. And at this point in time, I'm starting to have second doubts, or like feeling like the cinematic vibe in demos started merging with the poetry kind of thing, which by cinematic I mean like you focus on how the scene is mounted and presented and not really the overall feeling of the lyrics. And this was one of the demos that did that for me. And of course, another person that explored this a lot was Preacher. He did several demos that were really literally called poetry demos, or you had a poem and you try to make a visualization out of the poem. Spring Brought Us Drive Withered Flowers by Brainstorm and Traction is a good example of that. And he also made Fields of Glass by Traction. And a very good example on how I believe he sort of evolved from the poetry demos into a more cinematic approach where there are no words, but you still have this very strong feeling that could be very well expressed in words, is his more recent work called Isolated in Sunlight, which is more post-rock kind of sound. And post-rock is a style that really pertains itself very well to a cinematic narrative, let's call it that for lack of better words, where you imagine a whole scene happening in slow motion. At least that's what I feel when I'm listening to post-rock. And it's very cinematic in itself, and it's very poetic at the same time without you really finding the exact words. If you say the words, it feels like you're destroying the scene, like you're narrowing it down or closing it from something that can be abstract and whatever you want into something that's very specific and could not quite transfer that feeling that you want. Anyways, I'm diverging. Isolated in Sunlight, also pretty good demo, more recently released that revision this year. I kept exploring with poetry in demos. I did this wild for demo bit called There Is in Cyberspace in demo bit 2017. I wanted to include this as well in here. But the reason that I'm really making this video is because there was this recent release by Nesnausk called Black Hole. And Black Hole is not really poetry, it's more spoken word. Well, spoken word is poetry in itself, but I mean, it's not like just showing words on the screen. It's not like lyrics to a song. It's like you're saying the poem, and then there are some sounds that like create some sort of sound effects around it and create a certain vibe or atmosphere around it. And I really loved Black Hole for what it is. First, because I haven't heard people on the demo scene using this kind of style of spoken word and very clinic kind of sounds. There is this specific band, which of course I'm forgetting the name right now. Oh, what were the names?
Silently disappearing before my eyes.
Clipping. It's Clipping, bitch. Clipping. I was a big fan of Clipping when I heard them for the first time. They use like kind of IDM sounds, but very microtonal, micro sound, which is a fancy way of saying that you have very different tones, but very close together and very tight cuts, not sloppy at all. And it seems like everything is moving and a lot of glitches, but does some sort of clicks and cuts groove to it. At the same time, they use a lot of rapping on it. Rapping and spoken word, it's a mix of both, and they have this very intense atmosphere around it, which was really cool to see people do and being accepted in mass media. Anyways, Black Hole's soundtrack reminded me a lot of that kind of vibe on Clipping, which I hadn't seen other people on the demo scene abuse so much, and I really liked that Black Hole had this all visual atmosphere around it, but it wasn't exactly portraying what was on the lyrics. So it was like a parallel to the poem spoken word that was happening, which some people found it distracting and not, but for me it was excellent because you had to sort of open your mind and not really just think about what you're seeing or what he's saying, but you have to think about the parallels between that in what you're seeing and the abstract stuff. And are you saying something in the abstract? Are you saying something that pertains to me, while at the time doing a comparison to something else, visual metaphor in some cases, and I think they really hit it in the head, and I really enjoyed this demo. Congratulations to everyone involved from Nesnausk in doing this demo, and I'm looking forward to see more spoken word and poetry stuff in the demo scene. This is all I have to say for this video. I'm going to put up a playlist following this video so you guys can watch all the demos that I just mentioned, or the ones that have a link on YouTube at the very least. And hope you guys enjoyed. If I've forgotten your favorite demo scene production with poetry in it, please accept my apologies. Include it on the links below. This was made in just 1 or 2 days to think of some demos. I didn't went through the entire history of the demo scene to look for all poetry based references. This was just the ones that popped into my head. So once again, thanks for watching the video. Please enjoy the demos. See you next time. Bye bye everyone. Take care.